As always, we are doing our fruit tart today. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited about this. We're moving into a little bit more of our fancy patisserie kind of baking class. We've done a lot of fundamentals with our mixing methods and our basic doughs. And we're going to take what we've learned with some of our dough into today with our tart dough. And we're going to make a lemon curd, which is a new concept. We're clearly not baking anything, but making really, really nice fillings and pastry creams and things like that go a long way to making you a better pastry chef and baker. So this is one of my favorite and actually quite simple recipes. Making a lemon curd fruit tart makes you look fancy, but it doesn't take a whole lot. If you just follow the recipe and kind of like give yourself the time, then that's going to be our issue today, is the time and the temperature. We want to make sure that certain things are cooled down enough. So we need to get our dough made so that we can chill it for maybe up to 10 minutes before we roll it out. Meanwhile, we're going to make the lemon curd. That also needs to chill before we fill the pastry later. So there's a lot of like things we're going to play around with here, but I think we're going to get through it just on time. We're going to make that pastry dough first. Like I said, I have got here my dry ingredients measured out. The first thing for our tart dough, you want to make sure your oven is set to 350. If anybody didn't get the recipe, please let me know. I'm starting to send those out a lot earlier. In fact, you should get next week's baking recipe tomorrow, which is going to be crazy. But I put myself on a new timeline because my stores are pretty much back to normal. So I want to give you guys as much time as you can to get ahead for next week. If you don't have the recipe for this, then you can watch the video at a later time and make it later on, which is why we're recording it. So I have got my flour. This is definitely by weight. Tart doughs are kind of particular in terms of how much flour. It says 1.44 cups. That is a little annoying. So if you have a scale, use the scale at 180 grams. But if you don't have a scale, then measure 1 cup and then just under a half a cup for your 0.44, and you're going to be fine. So then you got your flour and quarter teaspoon salt. We've got a quarter cup of sugar, all in this one metal bowl. You do want to actually use metal. It says specifically metal because it's going to keep it colder while we're working with it, which is important for the butter. So in fact, some pastry chefs chill their entire bowl before they get started. That's something that you could do next time just to get really into it. We're going to use a fork or a pastry cutter or your fingers, which is why I just put gloves on. Like we did last time with the pie dough and the biscuit dough, you're going to cut in your little cubed cold butter. I'm going to use my fingers for this because I really want to get a feel for how it gets broken down to make sure that all of the really hard chunks of butter have been processed as much as possible. So I've got my butter cut into little individual kind of squares, which I just put in the freezer. I just did this about 10 minutes ago, so it's not like it was super far ahead of you guys, but you do want it to remain very cold through this process, especially if you're going to be using your hands like I am. So then I take the butter in between my fingers and I smush it with my thumb and my forefingers, and then that goes into the flour, and each square gets kind of smushed, but just a little bit. We are not trying to melt the butter, just trying to kind of break it up a little bit and get it into your flour. And then you can definitely use the fork or the pastry cutter, like exactly like we did with the biscuits or the pie dough. You would use the 2 forks to pull and kind of cut this butter into the flour. I'm going to use my fingers, like I said. This is just showing you another method of doing the exact same thing. I like doing this for tart dough because then I can really feel when all of the chunks of butter have been broken down. I can feel it with my hands. I'm a really tactile person. I like to stick my arms in big bags of beans and things like that. Don't judge me, it's okay. So you're breaking this all up, and you can see what I'm doing is I'm putting it in the flour and then using the flour to press and squish each little cube until it kind of just turns into these little like flattened, nubby pancakes. I hope you can see that. Starting to kind of break in there, but it's sort of like these weird nubby little things. You're just smushing the butter up like that and then breaking it up. And then you're just going to keep doing that with your thumbs, just pinching and breaking and sort of cutting up and breaking up all of the little butter pieces into the flour. You definitely want to do this as fast as you can so that that butter doesn't start to get super duper soft. You're trying to make it very small while maintaining the very cold temperature. So if it's easier for you to use that pastry cutter or fork to go a lot faster, totally the same thing. Once this is all together, we're going to be adding in 1 egg yolk. Oh, sorry, I noticed a typo on the recipe, the egg with 1 G, yolk. So I still need to separate my egg yolk out. I wanted to just make sure I showed you that technique, super simple, but I can't assume that everybody knows how to do that stuff. I taught a summer camp last year with 15 and 16-year-olds, and I said crack 2 eggs into the bowl, and there was a big mess all over the table because I didn't know how to crack eggs. So we're going to do that together really quick. But you can see that this is now starting to turn into that same coarse breadcrumbs look that we had if you use the fork or the pastry cutter. It's all started to blend in. Some of the buttery, floury little it's like wet sand if you were at the beach making a sand castle. Try to think back to your childhood. Can't wait until we can go back to the beach. Okay, so this is where I want this to be. We're going to work it a little bit more once we put that egg yolk in, but I can tell with my fingers that the butter is still holding together in its own solid, like little shapes, little units, but it's not hard. There's no solid corners or hard pieces of butter in there anymore. Everything is where I want it to be. I'm actually going to set this aside in the fridge just for the minute that I get my egg ready because my apartment, as I've said before, very hot. Just so that stays nice and chilled, and then we're going to separate our egg. This is only 1 egg yolk. Yeah. I'm actually going to save the egg whites because if you notice in the lemon curd recipe, we're also using egg yolk. So you're going to get about 5 egg whites out of this lesson today, which is great for your omelet tomorrow. So I need somewhere to put the yolk, silly girl. You want to crack your egg not on the edge of the bowl because then you get egg shards into your food on a nice flatter surface. Split it in the middle like you're going to make eggs, but keep the white inside, or the yolk inside the shell, letting the white fall into a bowl or a cup or the trash if you're not going to use it, but you should. Those little they're like a solid white stringy thing. That is how the baby gets its food during the gestation process in the egg. You just use your finger to kind of scrape it off using the side of the shell and try to take that off. That's the full part of the albumin, is what it's called. And we don't necessarily want that in our egg yolk, but it's fine for your egg white. So you just kind of scrape it off using the little edge of the shell, and you got a clean egg yolk. And what we're gonna do is use a fork this time, just because your fingers would get really gross if you did this with your fingers. We're going to incorporate the egg yolk. So I'm just going to put that like a little well in the middle, put that 1 egg yolk, and I'm going to bring it all together as much as I can, which won't be very much, but you just keep stirring, keep mixing so the dry kind of mashes into the wet egg yolk and any of the butter that's there. You're just kind of spreading out that egg yolk and combining it into the flour as much as possible. Although when you mix in the water, that's what's going to really, combine everything. Because you're going to then start to shape it into like a solid ball with your hands. But you can use your fork to kind of mash it in. If you see any really dark yellow crummy bits, you want to kind of break that up, spread all the egg yolk out as much as possible. And then our next ingredient, you'll see it says between 2 and 4 tablespoons of very cold water. If you have like a refrigerator that has a water spigot in the front, I would use that. That's cold enough. I have like a Brita thing in the fridge, so I'm gonna get some out of there. The coldest it can be, the better. You start with the lowest amount. So we're gonna just do our 2 tablespoons, and then if it's not coming together into a solid ball of dough, then we'll add 1 more, and then up to 1 more. So it's up to 4, but it might only be 2. So I'm going to start with 2, and I'm going to try to bring it all together just using that. The smallest amount of water, the better, but you obviously need to make a consistent, solid dough that will stick. So I'm going to use the fork to start with, just bringing it in from the sides, making sure any of the real dry stuff is off the bottom, and it's going to all work together. I'm going to use my fingers now so that I can get a feel for if it's going to stick in a ball. Yeah, it is, I think. Let's get all of it mixed in. Yep, this is going to stick just fine with 2 for me. It kind of depends on the size of your egg yolk. It depends on your flour and how old it is. Things like that make a difference. All right, I've got this very well mixed. I'm going to wrap this in a kind of loud noises. Sorry about that. I'm going to smooth this out. Wrap it into a flat, round disc. The flatter, the better at this point, because then we're going to be rolling it out anyway. And if you can get your dough, any dough that you know you're going to be rolling out anyway, if you can get it kind of flat to start with, it's going to save you trouble once you start to roll it out. So that is our tart dough. Should be really nice and smooth, kind of shiny. Get my plastic. You want to make sure that it's wrapped tight. Like if you put it in a a Ziploc bag or something, it wouldn't touch the surface of the dough necessarily all the way around, and you want that. You don't want any skins to form on this. It'll be the same when we do our lemon curd. You just really don't want the dough to dry out at any point around on any side of the surface, so you just wrap it really tight, nice and close, and stick that in your fridge. I'm going to use the freezer today. Make sure that it's nice and flat in there. I want to maybe move along a little bit faster based on today's time. You wouldn't necessarily do that if you had the time to let it rest in the fridge for about half an hour, just because you wouldn't need to, but we're just going to move a little faster today. The lemon curd, this is so simple. There are a lot of recipes online that you can make this even in the microwave, and some of them, the more highly rated recipes, are perfectly usable, good recipes. It's just almost as fast on the stovetop, so I'm going to show you the stovetop method today. We're going to make this in a double boiler, which is literally just a pot that you put enough water in on the bottom that it won't boil away, but not so much that it soaks the bottom of your bowl. So I'm going to fill it up about a quarter of the way up. Again, we're using a metal bowl for this. You can use a glass bowl if it's like very highly treated for heat. But you're going to bring your water up to a boil underneath this pot, underneath the bowl. So a good safe metal bowl is the way that we usually do this. I've got my 3 tablespoons of butter, my 1/4 cup of lemon juice, and we need to separate out 4 egg yolks for this recipe. And we need a 1/3 cup of sugar. The instructions are as simple as they get. Put everything in a double boiler, or like this is a metal bowl over a pot of boiling water. We're going to heat it while stirring with a whisk the whole time. You can't walk away from this. You have to whisk it the entire time it's cooking, because the egg yolks are going to thicken as the heat rises. If you walked away and didn't mix it, it would turn into like scrambled egg yolks inside of lemon juice. It would be a horrifying mess. So you need to whisk it the entire time, but it only takes maybe 5 to 6 minutes in total once we get it all into this pot. So we have got our bowl with 1/4 cup of lemon juice and the lemon zest. That was in that cup with that, just so you know. That was my 2 teaspoons of lemon zest. We need 1/3 cup of sugar. Make sure that's a level 1/3 cup, not heaping. And then 4 egg yolks. So let me bring over my bowl. I want to keep these whites. If the egg yolk breaks, that's okay. That happens all the time. Just try really hard to keep it inside the egg shell and separate as much of the white as you can from it. If you can't entirely, it's not going to completely ruin your lemon curd, although there are some things in the pastry world that if it got some egg white in it, it just wouldn't quite turn out the same. More importantly, if you were making something with egg whites and you got a little bit of yolk in it, that could actually make a difference in how certain things bake. Like an angel food cake is egg white only, and if you got egg yolk into that, it would definitely change how it would bake because there would be an added element of that fat. So 3, 1 more. But in this case, a teeny bit of this or a teeny bit of that is okay. It's not going to ruin your lemon curd. We're just trying to get most of that creaminess and fat content from the egg yolk. The egg white would make it, I don't know, you just don't use egg whites in custards, and lemon curd is basically just a custard with lemon juice. So we've got our whisk, we've got our egg yolks, sugar, lemon zest, lemon juice, and here is our 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Very important when you're baking to try to stick with unsalted butter, especially if it's like a scientific recipe like a bread. That added amount of salt is going to have an effect on the way everything turns out. So I'm breaking up the yolks and whisking it with the sugar and the lemon juice just a little bit before I get it onto the stove. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant my whisk in that butter, and I'm going to use that to stir the entire time. So now we're over here. Let me move the camera. Think you can see what I'm doing? Sort of? Yes. Okay. So you can kind of see, let me see if I can move it a bit more for you. There. I'm using that butter stuck to the end of the whisk to kind of, just to help me distribute the butter a little bit more quickly. And this helps it melt faster by rubbing it against the hot surface of the bottom of that bowl. You also are just trying to really, really carefully make sure that the egg yolks stay in constant motion and they don't curdle or cook into scrambled eggs. That was definitely the test in pastry classes. A lot of people made scrambled eggs in their custards. And it's a tough lesson, but once you've got it, it's actually quite easy and simple. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. These kinds of curds and creams and pastry creams and fillings go back a long time. So as you whisk this and the butter melts, you'll notice that the consistency of your lemon curd and yolks will thicken. Will start to get creamier. It'll actually start to slow down your whisking process just a little. You'll feel it actually be a little bit thicker to move your whisk through it. So that is coming together. You don't want to stop though until it's a very thick curd, like we're going for basically like jelly, but very, very smooth. If you've never seen lemon curd, it's a finely filtered jelly consistency almost. Not jelly, more like jam, but smooth with no pulp in it. So you definitely have to keep whisking. Even if the butter is melted, it's not done until the egg yolks have thickened and the entire thing has cooked into a thick curd consistency, this is some of the tedious stuff about being a pastry chef or a baker. You have to stir things for a long time sometimes, or knead things for a really long time, and it's crazy, but you'll see a recipe that says stir for 5 minutes. It really means that. And if you do less, it's probably not going to come out quite right. Or like knead your dough for 2.5 minutes. It really actually does mean to do that. So sometimes just looking at the clock when you first start and then keeping track, or if you're a weirdo like me and you count everything in your head without even thinking about it, then you've got that going for you. You can set a little timer, but you do really want to whisk this as long as you need to until it is a nice thick curd, and I'll show you what that looks like. What you're going for is something that we call nappe. Nappe consistency, N-A-P-E, might have 2 P's with an accent over the E, nappe, means it coats the back of a spoon thickly, so like it won't just drip off, but if you put a spoon in it and it coats the back and sticks to the back of the spoon, you've got nappe, and that's what we're going for. It's a little tiring. You can definitely switch arms, get your shoulder workout. I have not gotten any better with my left hand since our last classes, so I'm going to continue with my right. It's a funny thing, these kinds of pastry creams and curds and custards. You feel like nothing is happening for a good long time, and then all of a sudden it's done, which is why you absolutely can't just walk away or stop whisking for a little while or just say forget about it. Make sure your water is good and hot. If it's not at a boil, then it'll take even longer. So you do want your double boiler to be actually boiling. If that gets too hot for you to work on top of or whisk around, you know, stepping back like this actually makes a big difference. Using a much bigger, longer whisk, whatever whisk you have that has the longest handle. Sometimes using a bigger pot so your bowl will sit down better inside of it might help. I made a mistake there, I think, which makes me have to hold the bowl a little bit more so than I might want to, but we've talked about this. My fingers don't feel pain anymore. But you guys should take care of your hands, not like me. So I'm starting to feel the egg yolks thicken. This is what it's like making a homemade pudding. You're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then all of a sudden the egg yolks will be changing consistency and getting thicker. I can actually feel a little bit more resistance in the liquid as I stir it, which gives me hope that we're finally going in the right direction. If you were to do this in the microwave, I think it's the measurements change ever so slightly in terms of the liquid content, but not very much. And you put it in the microwave and you zap it for a few minutes, you mix it, you zap it, you mix it, you zap it, you mix it, and you just have to start off a little bit in like slower time increments at the beginning so that you're not cooking the egg yolk. But you whisk all of it together in advance, then you put it in the microwave, then you zap it, then you mix it, and then you keep zapping it until it's the right thickness. Oh, this bowl is getting hot. Steam is starting to really rise up from the bottom of the bowl. I can tell I'm at a really high boil now. When this gets to the right thickness, actually almost there, I'll be able to show you on the back of the spoon what I was talking about. And then we're going to set this aside into the refrigerator to slow down, to stop the cooking, and to start trying to cool it down a little bit. And then we're going to pull it out and just like let it sit at room temp to cool down a little bit more. Okay, I think we might be there. Smell it. It smells really lemony. It smells really fresh. It does not smell like scrambled eggs. If you had messed up with your egg yolks in this process, you would be able to smell it. So that's something to really be aware of while you're making pastry. If you're using raw egg yolks in a cooked process like this, you have to be really careful. You have to mix really well, and if you smell that smell of scrambled eggs, then you've got to start over. Hate to say it, but there's no fixing that once that happens. There's other things you can fix in baking and pastry, but that's not one of them. So we are here at nappe. I'm going to show you on this spoon what that means when you dip a spoon into it. And you can see that it is thick and coating the back of that spoon. Do you see that? How it's like not dripping off. It's nice and solidly coating that. That is nappe. That's what we're going for. So we are done. What you really need to do with lemon curd, very important, put a piece of plastic wrap all the way down to where it touches the surface of the curd. Plastic wrap is rated for food. It won't melt on top of it. Don't worry about that unless you got like Dollar Tree plastic wrap, which I use. Just don't use it on your food. So you put a sheet of the plastic wrap right on top and press it down onto the curd itself so that the curd will not form a skin. If it forms a skin, you're going to lose like half of the amount of curd you just made, because the skin, you can't reincorporate it back into the lemon curd. Once it forms a skin, you have to peel the skin off and throw it away. And we don't want to do that because we've just worked really hard to make this beautiful lemon curd. So you can see here, I've got the plastic pressed all the way down to the surface of the lemon curd, and that's going to keep it really nice and safe. And then into the fridge. All right. Those are our two main, like, cooking on the stove top. If you need to set anything aside, now's the time. I'm going to move these pots so they can start cooling off away from my phone so it doesn't shut off. Here we go. I'm going to get ready to start rolling out that dough. I have mini fruit tart pans. These are tart pans. They come in all different sizes, but they are almost always fluted edged and always have a removable bottom. That is important with tarts so that when it's done, you can gently remove it from the shell and you have a beautiful side and you don't have to break the edges or try to scoop out individual slices because you sell it as a whole tart that way. Pies, we just kind of cut in the pie and serve it. This way you wouldn't want to cut that. So you have a bottom that removes it so that you can serve it whole. They have 8-inch, they have 10-inch, they have full-size tart pans, all with this removable bottom. If you don't have that, I'm not surprised. Don't worry about it. Somebody emailed earlier and asked if you can make them in mini cupcake pans. Yes, you can. That would look like, I'm assuming that's these. I have these little mini cupcake pans. And if you have these, fantastic, or regular cupcake pans, you can use those. I'm just going to tell you it's going to be a little bit harder to get the shell out of the pan when you are done baking them. So you would pan spray each cup very well. You would then put in the tart dough, making sure it's pressed in around the edges and around the sides all the way up to the top. And you're not going to be able to really put in pie weights because they're so small, so you would stab a bunch of holes in with a fork, and then you would bake it. What's going to happen is the dough is going to shrink a little bit inside that cup, and it's going to loosen itself up just enough where you can use like a butter knife or a cake spatula to go around the edges, around the sides, and then gently kind of, this is where it gets a little dangerous. You want to either like lift it up and pop it out or kind of shake them out onto your cooling rack. But that, you can get some crumbly breakage if you do that. So gently picking each one out as best as you can with like a cake spatula or a little fine tip knife or something like that. You absolutely can do tart shells in these kinds of pans. It's just a little bit more tedious to get them out when you're done. But you can do that 100%. You can do all of this in a pie plate and then just serve it in the pie plate. You can do all of this in a cake pan. A spring-form cake pan would be wonderful because it also has that kind of removable bottom, and then you don't have to worry about trying to get it out. You move the pan, not the tart. So that's why this is great. Whatever pan you do choose to use, just make sure that it's well lined, well greased, that kind of a thing. The tart dough does have plenty of butter in it, but I'm still going to put a little bit of pan spray so it doesn't stick around the sides. And I'm using parchment paper and dried beans as my pie weight. You do that so if I didn't put a pie weight in the middle of this tart, the entire middle would come up like a dome, and then we wouldn't be able to put any of our nice pastry cream or fruit on top. It would all fall off. It would be a big dome of dough, even with the fork stabbed into it. So the pie weight, you need that to weigh down enough of a dough. If you're using those little mini cups, that's not enough of a dough. Just stab it a bunch. Okay, oh good. The freezer got this dough nice and firm, good and cold. Here's the thing about the tart dough. You can let this chill like overnight and make it tomorrow. If it is too cold to roll out, it will just continue cracking. You won't get a good clean roll. So at that point, you'll just say, well, need to let this rest for about 2 minutes here at room temperature, and then you can try to start again. If it is sticking really badly to your work surface or sticking really badly to the roller and it's just like goopy, obviously it's too warm. So put it back in the freezer or the fridge for a little while. I am going to make a few of these little tarts, probably not all 6. I'm going to go for 4. So I'm going to divide my dough up into 4 little mini sections and then roll each of those out separately just because of the work surface that I'm working with. If you had a bigger work area, you could roll this whole dough out and then cut it into your individual sizes if you're using individual sizes. And that's what I would do if I were using those little mini cups. Roll out a big sheet of dough and then cut out using like a round cutter or a little mini water glass or something and cut out small circles and then lay each circle into one of those cups. So I'm going to use my hands to gently push it. I'm just starting to flatten it out a little bit more, but I don't want to start melting the dough. So I need a little flour, which is good. I've got a well-combined dough that's nice and wet and fresh. You don't need a ton of flour because we're not trying to dry this out, but you don't want it to stick. Might be too cold now. It's cracking a little. Oh no, I can tell it's going to come up to temperature just fine. So you're rolling this out to about 1/8 of an inch, between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch. You're going pretty thin. You don't want thick tart dough in a tart, or else you will get an uncooked middle, and as I like to say every week, a soggy bottom, which is true. And pastry dough, tart dough, can be one of the more brutal things to work with if you don't bake it well all the way through. You will have a soggy bottom. That's just the way that this kind of stuff works, because then we're going to be putting something soft and wet inside of it. You definitely need to make sure that it gets really well baked through. I'm going to put a little bit more flour. This is a very nice dough. So as each one gets thin enough, you're rolling from the center out. It's just like we talked about with pie dough. I know you start in the center and roll towards the edges, but you don't want to roll over the edge because that's how you get like a really flattened out edge. You want to have the edge be as thick as the middle. So you roll just to the edge, carefully rolling it out, not over the edge. If you roll over the edge, you ruin the edge. So just a nice even thickness all the way through. And then I'm going to use my tart shell as my guide of about how big I want to cut it. You want to cut these just bigger than the tart dough itself, or I mean the tart pan or the pan that you're using. So mine is about that big. I'm going to use a little paring knife. Actually, oddly, that's a tourné knife. You'll never need one in your entire lives. It's to cut potatoes and carrots into 7 equal-sided football shapes. Because the French are weird. And they like weird things on their plates. So I'm going to use this knife to cut just around the outside, about 1 centimeter of a extra edge around. It's okay if it's not a perfect circle. Can I get 2 out of this one? No. I'm going to use this dough again, though. We can roll that out with the next one. I just want to lift this up and show you here. I'm going to go ahead and fill one of my pans up. Pan spray. I don't need a ton of this. You don't want it to be greasy. It has butter in it. I'm just trying to slightly zap the outer edges so that I ensure I don't get burnt crust anywhere stuck to the sides. And then you see this really well here. You want to center it as best as you can, and so that the dough doesn't tear, you gently, using your fingers, are holding the edges, and using your other thumb, you're tucking down into that very bottom crease so that it's as flat and wide as you can across the bottom. You're very gently tucking it into where the side meets the bottom of the tart pan. And then you know you have a good solid flat bottom, which is what we want. And with a little bit of that lip, that extra dough, you're just going to gently fold it over. This dough is going to shrink a little bit when we bake it, so it will come down the edges of our pan a little bit, but that's okay. It's still going to look really lovely. All I do at this point is I use my hands. So, okay, some bakers leave this overlap of dough on. One, they like the rustic look and they serve it that way. Two, some leave it on for baking and then they cut it off after because they think then, well, they don't think, they know then the dough will still be to the very top of the tart pan around the sides. What I do, I cut it off now, so I get that nice clean edge now just by pressing my thumb against the edge of the pan. I'm just cutting off that extra overlap of dough. I do that now, but like I said, the dough is going to shrink down. So in the end, it's not going to be perfectly flush with the top of the sides anymore. It's going to be just a little bit lower. I like a smaller sided crust of a tart. I like a little bit less dough, a little bit more filling and stuff on top, so I'm okay with that. I do it this way because trying to cut off the dough from the edges after it's been cooked is very difficult. I end up breaking a lot of my shells that way, and that's frustrating. So I do it this way and I get a little bit of shrinkage, and that's better to me than a complete loss. So I'm going to repeat this process just a couple more times with my other tart dough. I want to get this in the oven though because it's going to need to bake. Actually, I need to get this in the oven. I'm going to do one more here with this other one flat. We need to see it's got to bake for maybe 20 minutes, so the rest of class. Okay, I'm going to put this in, measure this out. Oh, here. This around. If you're doing a full-size cake pan or tart pan, then you would just lay the entire dough, roll it all out as flat as you can between an 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch, and then you're going to put the entire sheet into your dough, but the same thing into your pan. You want to very gently lay the whole thing in there, pressing it down into the sides of the bottom, where the bottom and the sides meet, all the way around. You get that good flat edge and bottom, and then tear off your extra dough. Oh no, put that in wrong. Okay. You get a little hole that tears in the bottom of your tart dough, just use a little bit of extra dough that you have sitting aside and patch it up. It's quite forgiving, especially because we're going to cover it up with our other delicious fillings and fruit. So as long as it bakes right, that's the most important thing. So to do that, we need to get it into the oven. What you want to do first is dab it a bunch of times with a fork. Spoon. On the bottom only, but plenty of times. You want to make a good amount of holes so that the air has space to escape. And then I'm going to use parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you can use a little bit of foil or plastic wrap, but just don't make sure that the plastic wrap's not too much of like extra edges in your oven, because those will dry out and start to melt. But parchment paper is definitely the way to go if you're doing any kinds of good baking. And to get parchment paper to fit into an odd shape like this, or to lay flat, it's very frustrating and it fights you on that. So it sort of seems like this is a weird thing to do, but you crumple it up into a ball. if you crumple your parchment paper up into a tiny ball and you make it all wrinkly and crumply, then straighten it out. It's going to lay nice and perfectly into your pie or your tart pan, and without folding itself or letting maybe the air blow it over or anything like that. So you just make sure that this is tucked down onto the bottom. And I'm going to use dried beans. Like I said, if you have uncooked rice, that works as a pie weight really well. Anything that you can throw into an oven that's not going to cook, right? So like dried beans and rice are the most commonly used item. So that goes in there, and it's going to keep the weight down so that the bottom of my tart dough does not puff up into a giant dome. And I keep that nice flat bottom. Bakers usually use the same. I worked for a woman who had the same bag of beans. We used as pie weights at this bakery downtown. She'd been using them for something like 30 years, the same beans, over and over and over again. So I'm going to just put these in. Actually, I'm going to use a little pan. Those are tiny, and they would fall. Okay. These are going in the middle rack of the oven at 350 degrees. And I think because mine are small, they're not going to take that long. But what we want to do with that is bake them until about, what does it say? It's about 10 minutes, I think. And then we're going to take the pie weights out. Yeah, 10 minutes, and then take the pie weights out, which is sort of a procedure, but you take the whole thing out of the oven carefully, set it up top, and then using the parchment paper or foil or plastic or whatever you use, you lift the whole thing out, set that aside, back in the oven for another 5 minutes. Hopefully we are finished with this just in time, although there probably won't be enough time to finish decorating. So I kind of want to show you some examples of what I was going to do, just in case we do run out of time. So that you guys can finish this. So what I have here fruit-wise, just because it's my favorite time of year fruit, and my favorite fruit season has just begun. We're starting with stone fruits. I've got some white peaches, some yellow nectarines, got some dark cherries, some raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, and that's all going to be my fruit decorations. I'm going to wrap up the rest of my dough. I can use this at any time. It'll stay good in the fridge for probably like 4 or 5 days, but it would freeze for a month or 2. It really just depends on how like freezer burned it gets. So I'm going to put that in here. Have some more fruit tarts at another time. The fun thing about decorating this, and that is the fun part, is sort of being creative and doing what feels right and looks good to you. So mine are going to be really small. They're going to come out when I have my shells cooled off just enough. I'm going to fill them not 100% of the way, about 80% of the way to the top of the outer shell. And then when the outer shell, when the lemon curd is filled up, then you decorate with your fruit. And usually fruit tarts are made with sliced variety of fruit. Strawberries and kiwis are often used because of their color. Strawberries are still in season right now, so you can definitely still find those. I got all this at the farmer's market, and I got really excited about stone fruit, so I decided to go with that. And you want to create things that are as visually appealing as possible. That is the point about patisserie. You need to catch someone's eye as they're walking down the street looking into shop windows. That's where all of this started. Really, really fancy decorated pastries came from shop windows. Before they had shops and shop windows, food wasn't nearly as pretty. It's about catching people's eye and making sure that you sell stuff to them. So even if it's just for you, which is my least favorite thing to say when you're cooking, because treat yourself, lay them out as beautifully as you can think of, or that you might want to arrange them. You've got these little pans are kind of difficult, so I'm going to cut my fruit even smaller. I'm probably just going to fan out my larger slices alternating color, my yellow peaches and white nectarines. I'm going to be mixing in some of my dark berries, but you choose a fruit or two fruits as your foundation. So if you've got strawberries, that's a really good foundation because you can slice them up and lay them out in a nice display. And then the rest gets filled in in all of the little holes. A fruit tart is traditionally filled up almost entirely around the entire thing. You don't want any empty space per se, unless it's like specific geometrically designed. So I'm going to cut some little cherry wedges. Kind of tuck them in every other. You can really come up with like a lot of pastry chefs, they'll draw out their designs before they start assembling. Obviously, if you were to start laying out your berries in advance and then all the colors were to bleed and run into each other, then you kind of defeated the purpose of your lovely arrangement. So you need to think about that. You want to think about the size of your pan and how everything fits together. Different colors, how they blend, and like how they might bleed. If you want to avoid bleeding with certain fruits, then you actually pat them dry on a little dry paper towel. A lot of pastry chefs will keep that right next to where they're working and like pat things dry as you lay it out because you want it to be just so. So then you mix in some assorted berries. You definitely want to highlight the color. So, okay, super simple idea in a pan instead of on a tart, but as you are working with different fruits, thinking about how they're laid out and the general arrangement is how you're going to create things that are more visually appealing and appetizing to eat. So this was a way that pastry chefs would highlight the fruit that's in season or the fruits that they could get imported, which is even more of a show off. And then what we do at the very, very end, and I'll show you this, we create a glaze using what's traditionally an apricot jam and water. And you just cook a tiny bit of the jam down, or apricot preserves, pardon me, in a small pot with a little bit of water. I'm going to use orange marmalade because I already had it, and it's still a nice, like, neutral colored preserves. It's not going to dye the color of my fruit when I brush it on, but it is going to give it kind of a nice little flavor. So that's, I think, a nice substitute. So I just did a little spoonful. I'm obviously just doing a tiny amount to show you. And then I'm going to do, so that's 2 tablespoons of preserves, and it would be about a tablespoon of water. You're just going to stir that out and cook it over a low heat until it melts out and all of the preserves or jam or marmalade or whatever you're using has thinned out and cooked into the water, and it has just become kind of this watery fruit syrup thing. It doesn't ever thicken up. We're not going for that. It's not going to actually be like a glaze. It's just the sugar from the preserves create a glazy effect when we brush it over the top of the fruit. The water is what we need to make it brushable, or else it's just a thick preserve. So by doing this, we are creating this nice glaze that we're going to, well, I think they call it a glacé, which is like glass. Like we're creating that really shiny, glassy look that you see on fancy fruit tarts in the windows. So that's how they do it. It's literally just apricot preserves and water mixed down over a heat until it's liquefied and brushable. And there's that. You have a pastry brush, whether it's a wood one or a silicone one, it doesn't matter. I tend to prefer the wooden ones with the real bristles for baking just because it gets actual more saturation. The stuff just kind of falls off silicone, but it is a lot more sanitary depending on what you're making. Okay, so that is just liquefied orange marmalade with water. Just kind of a nice thinned out syrup. If this were the fruit tart, this would literally, I'm just going to use my brush to gently brush and dab. It's kind of like you're dabbing this shiny, glassy syrup over all of your little beautiful, lovely arrangement of fruit. And it gives it a really nice extra like shiny sheen. I don't know if the camera's gonna pick that up, but it really goes a long way to adding extra visual appeal, and you get that extra little flavor because it just mixes another fruit flavor into your lovely fruit blend on top of your lovely fruit tart. So we've got the really tart, sweet tart flavor of the lemon curd going into a fairly standard, it's a sweet dough, but it's not the sweetest of the pastry doughs. And then obviously whatever fruits you choose to use, more often than not have a little sweetness to them, but that's why I like to use a mix of like sweet stone fruits like the peaches and nectarines, and then the tartness from the blueberries and blackberries and raspberries because they are quite tart. I chose dark cherries because I like the Brooks cherries, but the Rainier ones right now are still really good, and those are a little bit more acidic. Trying to balance out that, think of like if this is a really sweet fruit, then maybe pair it up with a slightly more tart fruit, and then you get a really good balance of flavor. If you want to really treat yourself, which please do, put a little bit of whipped cream on top and you're in heaven. So that is, we have a few more minutes here, and I think I'll be able to show you hopefully at least like a partially filled one, but just in case, I wanted to show you that. So you can see, I think from there, I'm just lifting up that little slip of paper with the bean still on it, carefully setting that on my work surface. My bottoms are held down, the sides are almost done, which means this is just gonna take another 5 minutes, which means I'm gonna have 3 minutes to show you a finished tart. Although if any of you can stay an extra few minutes, I can too. So you absolutely can. But what's going to happen is that's going to finish baking. I'm going to fill it with the lemon curd, like I said, about 80% of the way up the sides of the tart. And then I'm going to top my lemon curd with my beautiful fruit arrangements, varying each one a little bit differently, just to get my creative juices flowing and feel like an artiste. And then I'm going to glaze all of them and make them nice and shiny and beautiful, and they are done. I'm going to definitely take pictures of all of the final product and put them on our Instagram page so you can see what the finished will look like later. If you guys were cooking along with me, I know that we were going pretty fast, so hopefully you have time to finish yours up tonight too, and please send me pictures. I love that. If you make this at another date, then you can ask me questions. You can email me if I went a little fast. You can definitely reach out and let me know how I can help you. The video should be uploaded. I like to say like there's about a week turnover. Sometimes it's a little bit more. There's just a lot going on with editing right now. Yeah, this is really straightforward. Those recipes that I sent you are basic, but when done right and when put together, can make quite a fancy treat for yourself. So don't be afraid to try this if you haven't been trying it just yet, and please let me know how it goes. These beans, oddly enough, the more you use them, you know, the tougher that they'll be, but they're still edible. Like I could cook them for a really long time and they would be cooked black beans. So it's not like I'm actually even wasting the food, but so that's a fun fact. The more you use them, then no, but I could still use those, which is funny. Thinking about how you're cutting the fruit, like if you're slicing the strawberries just sliced whole, then maybe think about slicing the kiwi on an angle, or if you're using other fruits, it goes a long way to cut raspberries in half because they just look really pretty. Just different tricks you can use for playing around with fruit presentation. There are also, I don't know, this might be hyperbole, but probably not, like a 1,000,001 pictures of fruit tarts online. And you can tell which ones are the fails and you can tell which ones are the not. So get some inspiration, get some ideas from other people, get some ideas for artists, you know, looking at color wheels and thinking about how colors go together. Making a fruit tart for Christmas is really nice because you can just stick to reds and greens. Making it for different holidays or for maybe birthdays, if you know someone's favorite color. I made my friend a big purple tart. It was just like all purple fruits and grapes and things, and the blackberries and blueberries, everything was like these dark blues and purples. It was kind of lovely and nice. There's all kinds of ways you can make these special. And then here, one thing, I always like to plug something and somebody who knows better than I do. And this person, his name is Maury Rubin. He knows tarts far better than I do. He opened and created a place called City Bakery in New York. They tried to open one here in Brentwood, I don't know, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. I worked there for a minute. His tarts are pieces of art. They're really incredible, and they're all mini, and they're really beautiful. There's wonderful techniques in this book, but a lot of the recipes are online, and if you just search Maury Rubin tarts, there's some really fun pictures. At least you can get some ideas and inspiration from that too. So I do like to always, shout out somebody who's a little bit more skilled than I am. So if you want to get really into fancy tarts, or especially making minis or things like that, then that's a highly recommended cookbook. These are done. I am going to try to gently take one of them out. The shell. I wouldn't normally do this soon. You would let this sit for maybe a minute or two. But I do kind of want to show you the ease of why we like this pan with the bottom. So I can gently, very hot, grab the sides of the pan, and you can lift the bottom up, and it lifts the tart shell right out. Oops, it's still a little soft. Needs to cool down. But that way, you still have nice complete sides, and it comes right out of the pan as a whole tart shell. Perfect and ready to serve. The French like to serve their tarts off the pie plate, not scooping out of the pie plate. It would go on a fancy china, and it would go out whole as a presentation piece, covered in our glassy stuff. Okay, this is going to be really hot. My lemon curd is probably going to melt a little bit in here, but I really want to give this a try to show you a quick finish. All right, I've got 2 minutes. This is my Top Chef challenge for the day. You want this to be smooth and evenly spread out, although you're going to cover most of it up. But if anyone can see any of your imperfections, they're going to give your pastry shop a bad Yelp review. I don't know. I saw somebody leave a restaurant a bad Yelp review 2 weeks ago during a pandemic, saying that their curbside pickup wasn't fast enough, and that person is the worst person. Don't leave Yelp reviews during a pandemic. These people are doing the best that they can. All right, moving on. End of rant. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I am going to spread out my white nectarines because I've got my nice yellow lemon curd. I'm going to kind of use the white as my highlight color, and then I'm going to accent with the yellows and the darks and the reds and the other things. But just so this pops a little bit more, I'm going to use a little bit more of the white than I would the other colors. Okay, I'm going to, the cherries are going to bleed, so I really want to be careful about when I put them in, but when I do, I want to place them perfectly. Can't move them again. I really like being able to see the cuts of the fruit, all the natural shapes and lines and beauty. We made fruit tarts in that baking class I did with the teenagers too, and they did an outstanding job. They really, it's a great way to feel creative and special, even if it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like finger painting, but real fancy. Spreading some of these blueberries out, a little centerpiece around my raspberry, got my beautiful nectarines. Okay, that is not the best fruit tart I've ever made, but I am not mad at it. I want to glaze it. So I'm literally dabbing. If you brush it, if you actually brush it, you would dislodge your fruit. You would move it around. You don't want to do that. You want to leave everything in its nice position. But you want to let this glaze drip all over into the lemon curd and all over that fruit. It's going to kind of soak in and then leave a real glassy effect on the top. If you had some nice mint leaves, put that in the middle. Any kind of like centerpiece and clear decoration in the middle goes a long way. Keep our little centerpiece. And we have a fruit tart. Ta-da! That actually came out really well. Just in time. All right, so thanks for sticking a couple minutes late. I'm sorry that was a little bit of a whirlwind. A fruit tart is definitely not something that you have to make in an hour, so don't challenge yourself in that way. But make the fruit tart. Oh, thank you guys. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, type them all in, and I'm happy to answer now. If anyone comes up with questions later on while you're making this, I am super happy to help. And if you make them, please send me pictures. I would really love to see your artistic creativity and your layout. That's sort of a fun way to get inside someone's head, sort of see what they think of as visually interesting and beautiful. And I want to just see, oh, good question. The curd, the lemon curd, a fresh homemade lemon curd will last in your refrigerator for probably the week. It's got a good sugar and acid content. Those two things are natural preservers, but it's homemade, so like it doesn't last forever and ever and ever, but it will last for, you know, at least a week in your fridge. You need to let it cool down to room temperature before you put it away and close it up completely, right? You don't want to seal it in a jar or in a Tupperware before it's pretty well cooled down to a safe room temperature, and then that's going to mean it's going to be safer for you to eat, and it'll last even longer. Lemon curd is really great to have around for desserts. Honestly, if you're British, they just eat it on toast. Lemon curd is basically like jelly. So yeah, but try it on different things. It's really good on a lot of different things, not just fruit tarts. It's a great filling in between cake layers. So like white cake with a lemon curd filling and a strawberry cream buttercream. Whew, that's summer in a cake, and it is so good. There's a lot of different things you can use with lemon curd, and now that you know how to make lemon curd and you can see actually how simple it is, if you don't want to do that one day, you want to have a fruit tart, you really want to have a fruit tart, but you don't want to make lemon curd, they sell it. They sell it in jars. I know Trader Joe's has it. I know Ralph's has it. Like they sell it in either the baking section or in the peanut butter and jelly section. So you can buy lemon curd from a store. Just look at the ingredients list, because if it has way too many preservatives in it, then maybe take the 10 minutes to make it for yourself, because it goes a long way to just having it be fresh, natural ingredients. You can make it with coconut sugar. You can make it with raw sugar if that's something that's of a concern to you, for sure. So, and also you can make it in the microwave like we talked about. Look that up online if that's something that appeals to you, so that you can just have it done and have a big batch of it. And I would just suggest whatever fruit tart you're making, try to keep it in season. Whatever fruits we should be buying and eating. We're so lucky we have about 8-month growing season here in California, so it's not like you can get really good fruit almost all year long. But if you're eating peaches in December, then something's wrong with that situation. You're probably getting your peaches from South America or something. So seasonal fruit tarts are the way to go. Local, happy, fresh, delicious. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you had fun. I'm going to stop the recording. It was really, really, really fun, you guys. That was a lot of fun.